everyone, welcome to Handing the Shame Back, a show dedicated to survivors of child sexual abuse. Here on the channel, you'll hear lots of amazing guests who have encountered the horrendous, insidious crime that child sexual abuse is. You'll also hear from people who are working in this field. But we always have amazing people on the show, and I'm just so honoured and humbled to be able to bring it to you. My name's Gloria Masters. I'm your host. I have a trigger warning, as with all shows, and the reason for that is I don't want you to be distressed or upset, and sometimes these things can trigger us. So if that happens, please do stop watching. Go to the show notes below and you'll be directed to some resource and support. I have a wonderful guest with me today, and I think you're really going to enjoy meeting her. She comes to us from south of Sydney in New South Wales over in Australia. Her name is Justine Dean, and in no particular order, she's a coach, a mentor, and a confidant. Don't you love that? Welcome to the show, Justine.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to meet you.
Oh, it's great to be able to host you today. And these things happen, don't they, the way they're meant to. So, Justine, as with all guests, we just start with where it kind of all began for you, what experience of child sexual abuse you had, just as little or as much as you're comfortable to share.
Okay. My earliest memories were 3 years of age. And the reason that I know that I was 3 is because when I mentioned something to my mother later on in life, she said, "How the heck could you remember that? You were only 3." Uh, so my grandfather, her father, molested me. I can remember s- several occasions. One occasion, Mum walked in on him trying to make me do something to him and shooed me out of the room and told me to be quiet and not tell anybody. She never spoke to me about it. On another occasion, I remember, and again, I know I was almost 4, I said to her, "Papa's being rude with me." And I remember her shooing me away and saying, "Be quiet, don't be silly, don't say anything." In retrospect, now as an adult, if a mother had, it doesn't matter which order those 2 things happened, the fact that the second incident happened shouldn't have happened. Um, and he passed away when I was 6, and I can remember getting home from school. We lived in Brisbane and they were in North Queensland, my grandparents. I got home and Mum was inconsolable and told me that Papa had passed away. And I remember just feeling numb because I thought, "Oh, it stopped." And I was in a lot of trouble for not grieving enough, for not crying. I had disassociated and yeah. But that set off a trail of behaviours later on in life. Um, my mum never wanted to talk about it when I was little, and I didn't bring it up again until I was 15 because I started having flashbacks and PTSD responses. I suspect because, I was a teenage girl, and I went into her and said, I need your help. I'm having really bad nightmares. I feel sick. There's some, I'm really upset." Um, and she looked at me and screamed through gritted teeth, "Shut up. You're a child. Get over it. It's over now." And I remember going on to plead, "But I need help." And also I was in shock from her reaction because it took a lot of courage to speak up. Uh, and she said, "And don't say anything to your father because he doesn't know." Now, So I was 15 at that stage. So as a little girl, you wanna climb up onto your father's lap, and you want that comfort and cuddles, and he wanted to cuddle me, but so I would climb up onto his lap, but when he put his arms around me, if his hand touched my leg, I'd jump off straight away. So knowing then that he didn't know, he must have felt very hurt by that. But I also felt bad because he didn't protect me, but I didn't know that he didn't know.
So can I just ask you something, because it's
Sure.
just interesting, and thank you so much for sharing with us. It's wow. Um, you were in trouble for not grieving. Can you tell us a little more about that? Where did that come from?
My mum and grandmother praised and adored my grandfather,
Yeah,
and so did the community. Quite often, predators are very well enmeshed in the community and have a completely different persona outside of their private life. And I didn't cry, and mum was hysterical and inconsolable. So my parents were angry at me for not caring. I think I even remember, I remember my face went, I felt numb and my face went numb, but I remember a feeling in my throat, like a almost, it wasn't a smirk, but as an adult looking back, I'm sure it was just like, oh, thank God.
yeah.
And maybe they saw that look on my face. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was punished for not being sad that my grandfather had passed away.
You know, you tried not once, not twice, but 3 times, again at, the 3rd time at the age of 15, to perhaps get your mum to stand beside you and be your mum.
Mm.
And now looking back, do you have any thoughts around why she was unable, whether it was unconscious or not, to be unavailable to you?
Yes. There's two things. One of them would be, I know that mum's sister was molested in exactly the same way that I was, because when I described it to her, she said, "Yeah, absolutely." And it's funny, even though mum caught him with me, she denied it to herself and to everybody else that it was happening.
Okay.
However, when I was 27, I approached mum about some other incidences where she did not protect me with other people, and I said, "Why didn't you ever tell dad?" And her eyes went dark, and she looked at me and said, "Are you stupid, Justine? I didn't want to lose my husband." And that was a bit of a shock. Um, just a side note, mum's displayed a, a laundry list of narcissistic behaviour all of my life, not just with me, but with the whole family. Um, when I was in grade one, uh, my mum would allow me to go and play with our next door neighbour's son. So I would have been about 5, and he may have been 10 to 12, I think. I don't know, but he was quite a bit older, and he used to molest me as well. So we'd moved away from my grandparents, um, and there was a bushland behind a house or a vacant block, and he would take me down there. And she saw from her kitchen window that we were crouched down in the bushes, and I was very distressed about what was happening, but I just thought that's what people do to you because I wasn't protected. I'm like, okay, and another person, you've got to keep the secret, don't tell anyone. She saw it and screamed at me to come back to my house. And I went up into the kitchen, and it's the day I abandoned myself. I remember standing there, and I was 5, and looked up at her, and she's screaming at me saying, "What did you do? What did you do, Justine?" And sent me to my room. And so that compounded my feelings of shame, and that I'd asked for it, and like that it was a bad thing. And So later on in life, when my music teacher, I went to piano lessons and I did a couple of lessons, and I might have been in my early teens. And this is interesting. I cannot remember whether the teacher was male or female. I think I blocked that out, but all I remember is their hand sliding onto my leg and around my arm when I did a good scale. So I refused to go to lessons again. I couldn't explain to my parents why, because I thought my dad knew and didn't care. And I knew that my mum wouldn't do anything about it. So I was in big trouble for wasting their time and money. And again, when I had driving lessons when I turned 16, the driving teacher was lecherous. And my first driving lesson, tried to slip his hand between my legs as a reward and I just was, take me home, take me home. And didn't tell my parents, but I did go home and say, oh, I don't want any more driving lessons. And so again, they were angry at me because I appeared to be this really petulant girl, but I was terrified.
It just
Mm.
seems to me that a pattern of behaviour ensued where, you're 3, you're 4, you're, you know,
Five.
yeah, 3, sorry, you're 3
Yeah.
when you try, you're 3 when the first abuse began. The second abuser, you're 5 years old. The third abuser,
Yes.
your early teens. Your fourth abuser, you're driving lessons at 16. And through all of those, you'd learn, your parents had seemingly taught you very well, don't bother showing it to us because it can only ever be your fault. So therefore, kind of diminishing or minimizing any
Yeah.
kind of empathy for you, which as you describe is quite a narcissistic tendency.
Mm.
Mm,
Yeah. And I ended up marrying quite young. I was 18.
yeah,
Um, and I allowed someone who uh, was not respectful and kind, uh, and it's a textbook codependent. I want to prove that I can be a good wife.
yeah.
Um, and yeah, the intimacy was awful. Yeah, and the way that that was controlled was that it was my problem and I was bad in bed. Yeah. So I chose, and because that's all you believe you deserve.
Of
Mm,
course. Do
yeah.
you have any thoughts? And look, I'm so sorry that just happened and seemed to be a pattern really, with
Mm.
mum actually having knowledge. Do you believe that, or sorry, I shouldn't position it like this, Justine. What's your feeling about if Dad had been informed when you were 3 or 4? What do you
I
think he
I
would have
can't
responded with?
I
Do you,
can't predict what he would have done. I say that, as an adult, I know that he was very passive anyway because of
right,
mum's narcissistic tendencies.
yes.
Um, and he was complicit once he did find out when I was about 30. And he had been beautifully groomed by mum that whole time. I finally had the courage to bring it up when I was about 30. And it was around the kitchen table with my ex-partner there. And I just said, look, I'm aware that you now know. And I was just wondering if we could talk about it. And that's exactly how I said it. And mum's hand slapped on the tables, and so did my dad's. And he said, you will never talk about it again. Just get over it. And he said, I know I'm smiling when I say this, but it's
Oh,
because it's almost humorous. And I have done a lot of work. He
yeah.
said, if you've upset your mother enough, and if you bring it up again, I'll come across the table and hit you. And my ex-partner said, "Oh, that won't be happening." But I was shut down very quickly, and I believe that Mum had groomed him beautifully to believe that I had made stuff up and lied, um, even though she'd walked in, even though she admitted and her sister admitted exactly what happened to me happened to her sister. Um, and Dad was afraid of Mum, I think. You know, she is very controlling, and, you know, people in our family have relationships with her to keep the peace. That's that whole other piece from the sexual abuse is the narcissistic abuse, because that then confirmed the beliefs that I made up as a little person about myself and my worth. Mm,
So unless you're reflecting back and survivors, oh, hello, I didn't even say hello to you. Hello, beautiful ones. Welcome. Isn't Justine amazing? You know,
thank you.
there will be a lot of survivors watching this who can so relate to
Mm,
the abuse occurring within the context of having a narcissistic parent. And if the narcissistic parent is a mother, it's even worse because she has more time with you,
mm,
supposedly.
yeah.
So your needs can never be met. And I guess what my understanding is, and I'd love to have your thoughts on this, Justine, if everything is a reflection of how she sees herself in the world, how do you get your needs met? And if you can't, what happens next?
I didn't get my needs met because Mum put on a very different face in public about our family unit than she did behind closed doors. Um, we fostered a young girl when I was probably in grade 2 or 3, maybe grade 3, and she was a couple of years older than me. I might have been 9. I think this young lady was about 11. And I thought, I remember, and Mum wanted everybody to see that she was, you know, an amazing mother. And I had an adopted brother eventually, and she had another child. So I've got 2 brothers. But they fostered a girl a couple of years older than me, and she was favoured. But not even that. I don't recall feeling resentment, but recall feeling confused because I thought, well, what's wrong with me that you need another girl? And why are you being so doting and loving on this one? So I didn't. I don't think she had the capacity to support me. She'd grown up, you know, her father was an alcoholic. He was aggressive and abusive in the family. I adored my grandmother. However, I know she was complicit and quiet in whatever happened, and I'm not going to assume that I know any of that other than what I know of what happened to me. Um, so I didn't have any support, and I had to not any healthy support.
No.
So I started reading books about abuse when I was about 18 because I wanted to be a better person because I thought there was something terribly wrong with me.
Oh, look,
Mm,
as we do as children of
yeah,
narcissists, what's wrong? What's so wrong with me that you can't love me?
yeah.
Yeah,
Or that you allow those things to happen to me.
yeah.
Yeah. Mm,
And, again, survivors watching will relate to everything you're saying.
mm.
So, um, a couple of things to ask you. In your opinion, and you don't have to answer this if you don't wish to, in your opinion, do you feel that your mother may have also been sexually abused by her father?
I had discussed that with her, and he had chased her into a cupboard, and she locked herself in a cupboard because he had a knife. She vehemently denies it, and my aunt has disclosed to Mum that my aunt was more of a target. But I can't see how my mum would have escaped it.
No, I agree with you, and it
Mm,
shows the depth of the reaction when her sister told you what had happened to her.
mm,
Um, but the other question is this, because I suspect I know the answer, but once a narcissist, always a narcissist, Justine. So do you remember as you look back that your adopted sister was treated differently to you for much of a period or just till the shine wore off? Because I can't
Um,
believe she would have stayed up there with the narcissist. It can never be about anyone but them.
yeah, it became a drama, but according to my mum, we went in to sign adoption papers for her. I don't know how long she was with us for. It might have been 6 or 8 months, and my parents or my mum anyway, the girl's parent appeared on the day, apparently, um,
Oh,
and we never saw her again. So I don't know whether that is the story or not. Um, and mum's narcissistic behaviour escalated more and more and more throughout
yeah.
my life. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's interesting, isn't it? And for those who do have narcissistic parents watching, um, usually the manipulation that accompanies the classic narcissist is enough to ensure that although you may be pulled in and feel like you're very special, it is only for a purpose. It is
Oh, yeah.
never sustainable, which is why I wondered how long your sister was held up in the light until she was then dumped, because that's what they do. So
Mm.
reflect in the glory of the narcissist, Justine, or you're dead to them, really. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So I guess as we're looking at that for you, how did you see that play out? That whole narcissistic impact on you from your mother, knowing that you couldn't give her what she wanted, which was a healthy, happy, um, untraumatized child.
Yeah. I didn't know what it was at the time, and as much as my grandfather had groomed me, my mum groomed me thereafter. And it was she used people around me that I loved. In grade 2, I got a couple of Bs instead of As on my assignment and on my report card, and she's like, "Dad, you know, your auntie and grandmother are going to be terribly disappointed in you." Just all the typical. There's a great book called Fake Love by Nova Gibson, and even though it's about narcissistic partnerships, uh, it's absolutely it's the most brilliant breakdown I've ever seen of narcissistic behaviors. It's an extraordinary book. Um, but I grew up being a people pleaser,
Yes.
like really good people pleaser, completely codependent, saying yes to everything, feeling deep guilt and shame all the time about myself. Because if your own primary caregiver treats you that way, then you must be a bad person. You mustn't deserve love. And nothing was ever good enough. I once found that she'd collected all the business cards because I actually became quite a high achiever. Um, and when I met my current partner, long-term partner, we've been together 22 years and we're married. She was mortified that I left a high-profile corporate job to go cleaning. But he had said to me, "You're a mess," you know? Anyway, I knew then that she got her kicks from the results that I got. My daughter is this. I've raised this daughter. I've achieved this. Yeah. And yet, when I separated from both my partners, my mother went to court to speak against me and say that I was a bad mum and a troubled person and a terrible friend. Uh, and had letters, put a damning affidavit into court, and it was thrown out. The judge said he'd, in his 30 years, not seen such a horrible adult case of, you know, all of that yuck. And I was thinking, gosh, if my own mother is prepared to be that destructive about me, it's still, even though part of me believed I was a good person, I was abandoned by a lot of people because my mum was quite publicly telling everyone I was a bad person and a bad mum. And she said, "You don't deserve children." And I honestly, I often thought that's so hypocritical. And when we saw child abuse cases infrequently back then in the 80s and 90s, in the 80s, she would be so indignant and, "Oh, that's terrible." And I remember being a little primary schooler looking at her going, "But what about me?" And I think that whole thing is, it's like, well, what about me? You're saying that's terrible, but what about me? Mm,
So I think that's a wonderful place to leave our part one. I didn't want to
mhm.
interrupt you because
Sorry.
no, it's really it's amazing what you're sharing, and
Thank you.
it's such a good it obviously wasn't good for you, but look at you go now. Amazing.
Mm,
Just when you think about it, the whole experience and audience, please stay right there, Justine. When you think about it with a narcissist, those words are so true, aren't they? What about me? Because there is no room and there can never be room. And for those of us that have had a narcissistic parent or even two, there just isn't. And so to finally be able to navigate your way through it is pretty powerful. And I love what Justine has said about this, even, where she talked about the grooming of her father as well. So we're going to leave it with part one there. We're going to come back with part two. But just as always, beautiful people, beautiful survivors that you are, I see you, I stand beside you, and I believe you.